darkest cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters. Forest elders breathe their last, I'll bring them for your supper. Every piece of wood I bring carries a story.
Hey y'all, welcome to the Ground Shots podcast, a podcast that explores our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling. Kelly here, your usual host, and I'm excited to bring you this new episode of the podcast that features an old guest who has been on the podcast before, Sarah Galvin of House of Yore. A lot of people really loved her interview that I did with her a year or two ago, and we've been trying all summer to connect again and catch up since so much has changed in Sarah's life. So we finally got together and did a little conversation for y'all. It's really fun for me and for Sarah, and also I just hope it's fun for y'all to listen to. It's like a lot of seriousness and humor and fun wisdom to the whole conversation. If you haven't already listened to the conversation with Sarah Galvin, go back and scroll through. It might be good to listen to that one first before you listen to this one, so you have some context for more of what Sarah's work is about. So either way, if you haven't listened to her other episode, you'll really enjoy this one, I think. So right now I am in Cedar City, Utah, and you'll hear about it a little bit in the podcast because she asked me a little bit about what I'm up to. But I'm getting a transmission rebuild for my truck right now and been isolated for a little while. I had stuff come up more for me with transmission while I was in Nevada recently, and that's not the best place to break down or to have truck or car issues because a lot of Nevada is really remote, and as much as I really love the land out there, it was kind of a hard place to have stuff come up where I felt like suddenly it was unsafe for me to proceed without addressing my vehicle stuff. So here I am weeks later, finally getting my transmission rebuilt. My truck has never had any transmission work done, and it's been over 230,000 miles, which I guess I didn't know was pretty good for a transmission for a big old Ford diesel truck. So I'm actually pretty lucky that it hasn't been worse or hasn't failed before now. So I'm putting in the time to wait to deal with that and the money, and I've been here at this RV park, and this town is not the most interesting, but there's some cool stuff nearby that I haven't really been able to check out, but I've been able to bike into the hills near here a little bit this week. So since I knew I was going to be here for a week, I decided to it's like my life is not easy to schedule out sometimes right now. So I was able to schedule a conversation with Sarah, especially since she has a new baby, which we talk about in the podcast episode with her, and we were able to carve out a time that was flexible enough for her to being like totally in mom mode, and for me often not able to plan too far ahead with like a lot of the podcast interviews I could be doing on Zoom. So it was a really sweet conversation. I feel like the sense of like joy when I talk to Sarah, it's so interesting how you maybe don't know someone actually that well, but you can feel an immediate connection with someone, and I feel like that's what Sarah and I's relationship is like, and so it just brought me a lot of lightness into my life just to even be able to have a couple hour conversation with her. So you got to witness that, like us just being like, hey, what's up, buddy? And let's get into some stuff and share it with the world. So I hope you really enjoy tuning into that. There is a video version of this conversation since it was done on Zoom. I did a video recording and I put that on Patreon for folks who are subscribed to support the podcast on there can see the whole almost 2-hour conversation of us, you know, our faces and stuff. You can see us speaking with each other on there. And so that's there for you if you want to listen to that. And yeah, I'm excited to just release this too for y'all and appease the podcast audience that loves Sarah. And what to say this conversation's about. I mean, if you really enjoyed the themes of what we talked about before, you'll really enjoy the themes of what we talk about in this episode. I think this one is poignant because Sarah is speaking to what it's like to experience the world from a place of now having birthed a being into the universe. And so we go a lot into this episode on mothering in the modern world. We do some speaking to attachment theory, and she's in the position right now of being a young mother and having a lot of responsibility for creating healthy attachment with her young child. And so we speak to basically like the core work in what we can do to change ancestral trauma in our very actions day to day of tracking our inner landscapes and tracking how we behave according to them. And when you're responsible for another human being, it becomes another whole layer of seeing and understanding and like, yeah, a sense of responsibility to tending to yourself as well. So I think we get into that in this and visit some of our old themes of like, what does it mean to be in connection to land as an ally, and how does ecology and land connection mirror our like interpersonal relations and somatic connections. And we don't go like so in depth into that and to the point where it could be like a whole lesson on it, but it's definitely something we relate to our conversation as we check in about like what Sarah up to right now in her life. So there's a lot there. The way that Sarah speaks about heavy things in a light, humorous, jovial way, I really appreciate. So you'll probably laugh a few times in this episode. And just really, I really hope you can kind of glean some of the lightness of our like friendship connection through this shared space and moment in time. And like it was medicine for me in that moment that we did this conversation, so I hope it's medicine for you as well. I want to mention a couple things before we get to the podcast episode. First off, Charity of Mother Marrow, whose music has been often the theme music for this podcast, and I've featured a lot of Charity's music also as like interstitial music in this podcast over the years. Charity's got a GoFundMe going right now because they're dealing with some health issues, mysterious kinds of health issues, and some of it known and some of it unknown, and they had to let go of their teaching job and just pay attention to their health and working on themselves. So there's a GoFundMe going around for supporting Charity in just being able to rest and be a mom and take care. So I'm gonna post the GoFundMe for that in the show notes for this episode. If y'all really appreciate Mother Marrow's music, this could be a good time to support Charity. Charity's someone I've known for a long time and has often been in parenting mode alone, dealing with how to be a musician in a world that doesn't really respect artists and musicians, and dealing with what it means to have trauma and like health stuff going on. And so I hope that y'all who have really enjoyed Mother Marrow's music over the years can pop over and maybe give some contributions to Charity's GoFundMe. That would be so awesome. Also, I have a GoFundMe going, which is the first time I've ever done this, for my transmission repair for my truck. I feel weird about like asking for money in this way, or like it's not really like asking for money as much as like here's an opportunity for you to support this project, because like I love to critically analyze, say, capitalism on this podcast and how we need to change things, and I'm still existing within the framework of capitalism like all of us. And so navigating how to make this project as accessible to people as possible is often at the detriment of myself, because sometimes I'm collaborating with people and sometimes I'm not, and I'm often holding this by myself. So things like my truck being broken really inhibits my ability to do this work. And so I went ahead and just created a GoFundMe, despite feeling a little bit shy about it. And I feel really grateful for folks who have contributed so far. So I'm going to put that in the notes for this episode as well. As like I'm recording this right now, it's about a third of the way through the goal that I set originally, and it's been a few days, so it's actually not too bad. But if y'all feel inclined to help me fund not just getting a new transmission for my truck, which is what's happening right now, but also like there's other expenses that have come with that, like having to stay in an RV park and getting towed and a few things like that. So that would be helpful. And any extra money from this is going to go straight to the podcast, the overhead of the podcast. So feel free to pop over and check that out, and that would be really, really awesome. I know I said in the spring that I would do a GoFundMe specifically for the podcast, which I never did. And then I hit the point where I'm like, oh, I actually need support because now I need a new transmission. I'm gonna go ahead and transition this over into the conversation with Sarah Galvin of House of Yore, us catching up, and I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Sarah and getting to join us in our jovial banter. And happy listening, y'all.
Hi.
How are you? Stuck in the desert?
Yeah, I'm in Cedar City, Utah, which is, yeah, I guess it's desert. Yeah, I would say that compared to where you are or where a lot of people are. I would call it desert. Yeah, getting a new transmission, and I feel like it's very interesting where I'm at right now. I'm like, oh, I'm living in an RV park and just walking to some box store when I need to get groceries. I don't know, it's just like really strange little moment. And I was freaking out about it at first, but it's actually been not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I mean, some days are hard because I haven't interacted with that many humans in a while, like in like connection. Any moment I get, I go into the like little front office and I'm like, hi, I need propane. What's your life like? That it's a little weird, but yeah, I mean, it's just what it is. And I've just been in my little world a lot, doing stuff, crafting, making things, like stuff I don't really get to do when I'm just always traveling around. There's a little weaving that I did.
I love it. I love the colors.
Yeah, I'm really loving yellow right now. It's like you can see yellow, yellow, and the buckskin's gonna go on it. But yeah, it's been okay. I mean, whatever. There's a lot, going on, but like, I feel relief that I'm gonna get a new transmission, and I'll like feel like I got a heart transplant or something, So,
well, and then
yeah.
you know that like you're not going to have any transition problems probably for the next while, if it's at all been in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I mean, they were shocked that something bad hadn't happened already with how many miles were on it. So I was like, okay, well, I'm actually lucky in a way that it didn't break down somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it kind of did, because I kind of had trouble in the middle of Nevada, but I didn't like have an accident. It was just annoying and vulnerable, and whatever. But I made it out alive. So far, but it's like being out there, really intense landscape that can be medicine, because it's because of the solitude and how you really like are faced with yourself in the environment and without the context of immediate social, like the social norms, social realm. It's like you and the land and the timelessness of it. It can be both medicine and like in those moments you're like, oh my God, like I could die out here and no one would know. Like,
I think that's part of the medicine of being in nature, though, is like really being in it. And I was talking about this to somebody recently of just like having lived in more remote areas and like made life there. There's just this element of like nature is our ultimate mirror. So it can be this beautiful desolation, or it can be like the biggest underworld of our lives, you know? And I think that the more that we end up getting connected to it, the more we end up getting connected to ourselves too. It's like vice versa. But it's interesting because like last time we talked, we like kind of, I don't know if we went into like nomady stuff. We talked about that maybe more privately. Yeah.
We did a little bit. You talked more about what happened to you on the island in Alaska, but you also talked a little bit about having been a little like a train hopper, hitchhiker kind of nomad for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. And then like settling and the whiplash of like realizing how much deeper it can go. And like the constant like choosing, you know, and
Oh God.
and it's like in some ways that doesn't end when you stop being nomadic. It's just different. Instead of like constantly feeling like you're choosing these really big things, you're choosing your mind set shifts on the daily. And that's like that's been really pertinent. That's the newest layer I feel like I'm going into even more so through motherhood now.
Yeah.
Is like how much we create our reality through the narratives that run through our mind, and how simple it can be to turn things around, but how much self-responsibility it really takes. And like I think that, I don't know, the kind of connection to some sort of more like warrior spirit, but like on the poetic end of the spectrum than the like head chopping end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when you got all your needs met, like, because when you're traveling or you're kind of like not really rooted or grounded in and like haven't decided that big part of your life, like you don't necessarily have all your needs met at every moment, and you're having to just live with that, and there's an inherent stress to that, like that you're tending to more than actually things that are going on inside, although like they're kind of a thing that feeds itself, because the way that you're perceiving your reality is still affected by your internal landscape just the same. But it's just like when you get all your needs met, there's like comfort, security. I mean, security is a false idea ultimately anyways in the end, but like the sense of like, okay, I have my warmth, I have my water, I have love, touch, I have food, good food, I have, you know, at least not that staying put meets all your needs, because you might not have enough community or whatever it is, but it's just like there's something that ends up happening when you have like the familiarity. I have my tea every morning in the same place, the same countertop. I have the same walk I try to do every morning, the same like bush that I go visit. It like changes because those layers like accumulate and build something that then like has you sitting with yourself every day, like how was I approaching this bush yesterday when I came over to it, or how was I approaching this walk yesterday? So I hear what you're saying, like, and in some ways I'm like, what is that like? Like I want that. What is that like? And it's like, yeah, like I think the intention for this talk with you, I mean, what we're doing right now, just checking in, what's life like? A lot of people really loved your episode of the podcast and the things we talked about, and also like our conversations and stuff. And I don't really have a full plan, but I also just like getting into some of this stuff to me is like, seems like would be really awesome. So we kind of already have moved into it, but I guess, you know, when we last talked, you hadn't had a kid. that was the biggest thing. And a lot of the stories and wisdom and like kind of thoughts and feelings you had were talking about things that happened to you in the past. So I guess now, what has it been? How long has it been? Like, it was the spring. Still at my parents'. It was like late winter, early spring, and it was like this.
Was it 2 years ago?
Almost. Yeah. No, it was in the spring because I was with Gabe and I were at my parents and we were kind of losing it, but trying to hold it together there. That was a year and a half, maybe, or something.
Okay, so I was probably like almost pregnant when we talked last time, maybe.
I think you had told me, but secretly no one knew yet or something. You had told me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I don't know, but
we always planned on being pregnant. It just kind of wasn't. I mean, it came on it. Theo came on his own accord. Let's just say he chose this time, and I had a wild pregnancy. So, like, I just was pregnant. I didn't go see anybody about it. I didn't go check his, picture through blasting a bunch of sound waves into my belly. I just kind of let it be the mystical experience of like, wow, I keep getting bigger and sensations keep shifting and my boobs are ginormous. And and then we went into summer, and so I was like, if it was spring, because I think we conceived on April 30th is my tracking down the time.
Okay, maybe you told me later about it because we did the interview and it was like winterish spring. Well, Virginia winter is different than Alaska winter, but but I think you told me later because I think you just told me later, I think, like before
because I think I was in this place where I was like really feeling myself. Like I was like kind of softer than I'd ever been in my life. I'd always been kind of like, my grandfather would call me a lean, mean, and peachy keen. And I was always kind of like strong. But I've always had like curves, but I was getting like softer and I was feeling it in my energy too. And I look back and I'm like, no wonder I got pregnant. Like I was just like calling it in, I think.
Like, come on now.
And I always would talk about how I'd love to have my first child before I was 30, but my partner was kind of not as ready in a way. Like he wanted to have more of our life set up and be in a different place. I think for us, like I left home at 16, but he went to college, like university, and did that whole thing. So I feel like I've been on my own for a while now, and I'm like, cool, I'm ready for my little, like, to create all these little like mini me's that get to run around, do adventures with us. And but then once we like were pregnant, and now him, like, he's like, I can't imagine not having Theo now. This is like so perfect. It's kind of perfect timing. But so that was like, we could spend the whole podcast episode talking about the intensity that comes from being pregnant in our culture and not outsourcing your wisdom and knowledge to anybody else but yourself. And like, what a fucking journey that was for me. And then on the other side of it, how isolating it was too, because there's just not very many people I could talk to about it in my daily life. And I weeded through a lot of friendships. I weeded through a lot of connections and people that I was just like, you like, being around you doesn't feel, it was like pregnancy was like, I was like this pillar of clarity. And I was just like, wow, this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel good. And I really had to like get in myself. And then, and then Theo came on January 29th at 3 a.m. and it was just Sky and I, and we were snowed the fuck in. And yeah, I went into labor on and off, honestly, for like 2 days. And then it wasn't real. It didn't feel real until like that night. And then he was born at 3 a.m.
Wow.
And yeah, it was like just a little baby bear cub born in the den of winter, like, you know. And then motherhood started, and I had so much work done around birth and pregnancy and how I was doing it and how intentional I was being and all this stuff. And I think I was prepared for having a baby on some level, like when the baby actually arrived, but there's a lot of things that I just didn't even, I like breastfeeding. I was like, breastfeeding, you just like give them your boob. Like, what is there to learn, you know? But it's the same thing with like keeping milk goats, right? So like, this is the analogy I like to use. It's like, I wasn't really breastfed that much as a baby. I was bottle fed and I had formula. And I think my mom did it a little bit in the beginning as like a connection thing, but it was just almost sounded more like novelty. Like when she came up and visited at one point, she was like, wow, you're just nursing all the time. And I was like, yep. This is what I do.
Generational
like,
difference in why how people see breastfeeding too.
Oh my God. Like, you know, well, and it's interesting because we, you know, like when you have a milk, we had 2 milk goats. One milk goat was bottle fed, so she never really nursed from her mother. And so when it came time for her, when she had her babies, we like, you know, didn't do forced separation or anything like that for her milk really. And we let them kind of naturally wean the babies more. And she just like didn't really do a great job. Like she didn't know how to, like, she kicked them off all the time. She'd get really annoyed with them. She didn't know why they kept going for her udders. And she'd like, at one point, she like even rejected one baby. That was while I was pregnant. And that's when I knew I was pregnant, because I was bottle feeding that baby every 3 hours. And there was one night where I was in the nighttime holding the baby. It was in my arms and I was bottle feeding it with the warm milk. And it was like right at my boob level. And I just started weeping at how, and it was like milk drunk on me. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm so ready for my own baby. I just like need my own, I want my own species. I don't want to go put this baby back in the barn. Like, you know, and then it was like, I think a couple days after that, me and Sky were like, you know, I think maybe we're pregnant. There was just a lot of signs, but yeah, I felt kind of like April, the milk goat who wasn't really nursed from their mother much. Like there are certain things where it was hard to tap into my intuition around motherhood in a way, because I had the like mind gap of like my social conditioning, you know? And so it was like I'd have to work through that to like tap into like my animal conditioning of like how this works, what I'm doing, because I've been trying to intuitively mother for as best I can, but there's a lot to pick apart, and our culture is just so not worked around mothering. I mean, if we look at Earth as like a representation of mother, like it is very clear we all have a big mother wound because not very many people are really living in life like in a, not even just reverent or reciprocal, but even like connected. Like there's a attachment wound and issue in people's ability to connect with the earth. And I think that's been a knowledge for me for a while, but you know, then you pull back the layers every time when you're trying to get closer and closer, and you're like, damn, this goes deeper.
Mm-hmm. So you feel like that has come up for you in a way that you didn't know before because now you're a mother.
I think this is until we fucking die. I don't think I'm ever gonna like get to the center of the onion and be like, cool, I never have more to, I'll never have to learn more from the earth and this connection. And myself, and I feel like I am viscerally, anytime I start to even have those inklings of thoughts, life is like, bitch slap across the face, like, let me humble you some more.
Yeah.
Motherhood's the same. It's like, oh my god, I slept 5 hours straight last night. Like last two nights have been, I've nursed like more than every hour in the night, so I'm not really sleeping more than like 40-minute stretches at a time. But like two nights before that, I slept 2 nights in a row that had a 5-hour stretch, and that was the most I've slept in a stretch since like, I think I was around 8 months pregnant, which was
Wow.
10 months ago. And I was like feeling so good, and I was like, oh my god, I can't believe we reached this point. Like, now I'm gonna get to start having more sleep, I'm gonna feel so creative, like I'm just feeling. And then it's like, life is like, honey, what are you talking about? No.
That's something I think I like. That's something I hear a lot of people talk about who've have new babies, is like the big change in sleep if you're breastfeeding and you're not leaving your kid to cry in another room and like, you know, whatever. Some people do it that way. That's how it was for me. Like I don't remember. I didn't co-sleep with my parents. I didn't get breastfed really. So, you know,
So
but I had
we
to
have
go back.
attachment wounds.
Yeah, God.
Yeah.
Really this year with some of my stuff going on, I'm like, damn, I do have a lot of childhood wounds, like shit. But the it doesn't really work within the framework of capitalism at all. Like you're supposed to be like a sleep deprived person, breastfeeding all the time, eating all the time, being in a place of nurturing with other people who have babies too, with people around doing, you know, like helping you sometimes or taking the baby off your hands or whatever. You're supposed to kind of be in that altered state for a while. Like this is what you do. Like you have a child, this is your role. But like in capitalism, it doesn't. There's this. It's really inconvenient to be sleep deprived because you can't function within that. I mean, you can still feed yourself and still do some things, obviously, because you have to. But like, you're not meant to really function, like go to a job and be mentally aware in these certain kind of ways, like. Or
Unless
you
you just
know,
want to be like the mom who pounds coffee, and you're just like, coffee, yeah.
and then wine at night, you know, like, all right, stress relief. Like mommy wine
My
club.
adrenals are shot. It's like,
Yeah.
yes.
I hear that as a trend. I mean, because I've been feeling the baby fever some this year for the first time. I'm 35 and I never thought I would feel that, but I'm like, God, it's like, of course, there's nothing in my life that is really solid in a way that would make sense for me right now, I guess. But like feeling that feeling of wanting to nurture and take care of and connect with like a young, I mean, I love taking care of other people's kids and hanging with other people's kids too, and there's something to that. Like, well, I don't have that in my life right now, but I know other people need other people in their life to be a part of that process. So I've definitely thought a lot about that, like, oh, how could I be another person there, like helping or like around the way it's supposed to be, since the way that at least it has been for a lot of other people in the world. But it's like crazy to think, like, how are we I mean, y'all have your way, y'all are figuring it out, but like, how are people supposed to make enough money to pay the bills while actually appropriately raising a child? Like how do we create good attachment? How do we reprogram that in the context of the world we live in, where like the attachment wounds that we feel was because our parents felt like they had to do that because they had to live in the world we live in. It's like, well, if we're trying to stop this chain of reaction trauma, then we kind of have to like.
That's what I'm saying with the whole self-responsibility bit. It's like, I think, like, so during my child labor, there was this point where I was in a lot of pain, and I was still in my head, and I was thinking, and I was like still seeing myself and like picturing myself having the free birth of my dreams in my cabin with my man, and that I'm doing this for the first time and I'm such a badass, and like my head was still really in it. But then like every contraction was like super painful, and I was like, oh my fucking god, like I must be so close to transition. Like I must be like, because there's that last bit of dilation where you kind of like, it's the most painful, most intense, and then you've fully dilated, and they call that transition, and you're transitioning eventually to feeling the urge to push, and or at least release your baby out, because I didn't have to really push at all. Theo just kind of like, my body totally did it for me. But yeah, it's called the fetal ejection reflex, and it's so cool. But and I was really like in it, and at one point I was just like, all of a sudden the contraction stopped, and I was like, whoa, I must be in that lull zone, the limbo before the urge to push. And I was like, damn, my labor was like 3 hours. I'm fucking on it. And I was like totally still in my head. And I looked at Sky and I was like, I think I got through it. I think I'm just going to be in the urge to push now. And I was like, I'm just going to lie down and sleep for a little bit, because I hadn't been sleeping much. Like when you're huge and pregnant, you just don't really sleep that well. And so I lied there for like 20 minutes, I think, or something. At least that's what it felt like. And all of a sudden this huge enormous contraction came, and it was more painful than anything I'd felt yet. And I was like, oh, this doesn't feel like the fucking urge to push. And I started getting really nervous, and I was like, this is real. And I looked at Sky and I was like, babe, I don't think I can do this. I think I'm gonna die. And he was just like, babe, no, you're fine. Like I was like, I don't know, this is so intense. And he's like, well, just why don't you feel up there, see how far along you are. And so I like reach up and I'm feeling my cervix, and I pull like try to measure how much I can feel the head, and I pull my hand out and I'm like, it's like this, babe. And he's like, oh honey, you're like 3 centimeters, like you've got a long way to go. And I was like, oh my god, how am I gonna do this? And it was just this moment of like, I need to just surrender and abandon myself in this. And then it was this like microcosm and the macrocosm of like how much our inner narratives still run the show. And anyway, I had to like, we had a rebozo, this like long woven scarf. It's mainly from like indigenous traditions in like Mexico and Central America that you use for all sorts of cool ways and applications during labor to help like alleviate the pain, or like help the woman in different positions and stuff. You can also use it as a baby wrap. But I had it hanging from the ceiling, and I just like wrapped each wrist around it, and then just like squatted into every contraction for the next like 3 hours. And it was the like I literally had to visualize the universe like taking me from behind, because I was just trying to open myself up. And so I was just like, universe, just fucking take me from behind, like I am here for you. And dude, like it was the most psychedelic thing I've ever experienced. And I eventually got to this point with it where it was just like, I didn't think I could do what I was doing. I had to like completely step out of my victimhood self of like, oh, poor me, this is really painful, and like, how am I gonna do this? And I just like, I want someone to help me and save me from this feeling. It's like, there's none of that. Like, and I was like, and then when I, eventually, had the baby and go through the experience, and then since then, so far, my postpartum has been this like complete dissolution of all of the areas of my life where I have been feeding the victimhood wolf. And I'm like, oh, fuck, this is the bane of my existence. This is the bane of everything I've been trying to create. This is the bane of like all of the ways that I seek to more deeply connect. It's the victim in me that pulls myself out of it. And like, don't get me wrong, there are things in my life that I have been a victim to in certain experiences, but I don't have to live in the victimhood. And making that distinction has been really hard for me, I think, in my life. And I think like in the, our last episode, whatever talk together, I mean, it's characterized even by that conversation. Like I was living so much in the past still, in a way. And in a way I kind of am, but in the sense that I'm like, feel like I'm finally closing these like bigger loops that like I had no idea I still was like strung up by. And it's been making me realize how much victim mentality is also something I think really, I think on some level our generation has done a lot of work on getting more connected to the emotional realms and to like what, seeing what's broken in a very like visceral, emotionally connected way. Like I think even like people compare like this generation to the 60s in a lot of ways, and I think that like in the 60s I don't think people were actually that emotionally connected. I think it was a lot of just like obliterating the chains that were really holding people back in these like very small boxes, where I feel like now it's like there's still some of that, but it's also met with like people are finally feeling their feelings, like people are trying to actually feel more. But in that, it is so fucking easy to get caught into like the victim mentality. And yeah, I am just very much consistently right now being like blown away by how much I can continue to take personal accountability and self-responsibility, and how much that then is like literally turning around and making my life feel way better than it was. And I'm like, wow, we really do create our own fucking prisons. Like
you've called me out on that a few times this year, and I'm dealing with that myself right now. Like where you feel, maybe if you feel like somebody treated you wrongly, and there hasn't been like this formulaic thing that's happened to like fix it or right the wrong or whatever in the way that the speed or the method that you want, then you feel like a victim, right? Because they shattered this thing for you, or they made you, or they did something that then you felt pain by. And I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, you have called me on that a few times this year too, like, hey, like look at that. And you had your child, and you were then telling me that that was something you've said like after you had your child. And now I'm like, oh, I can see like when you're in an experience like that where you really, no one can help you get through the pain but yourself. So sure, as people can be around, supportive, like
if anything though, I think that more people around would have been detrimental to my experience.
That's what another friend of mine who has given birth to 3 children has said. Like when she's in labor, she's done it. Her last 2, she's just like, I don't want anyone around. I don't even want my partner around. I just want to go in the bathroom and be in my own shit by myself. Like I just need to be completely like unwitnessed, unfucked with, like in my own spiritual connective to the universe, to myself realm. And that's the only way I'm going to be able to smoothly do this, or like do this the way I feel like it needs to be done. Like I got this, I'm good. Like this is, I don't need anybody. Yeah. And I can imagine like people watching you and or like hovering onto you or whatever, who like, oh my god, at least like Western culture anyways, like I would not want my mom or my aunt there.
No,
Like
I had to like, my mom tried to come last minute, and it was like throughout the whole pregnancy a really hard thing that I kept having to say, I don't want you at my birth, I'm sorry. Like
yeah.
And it was like, you know, talk about like, I feel like I held a lot of boundaries throughout my whole pregnancy, and then now I've been kind of like dealing with the inner boundaries of myself on that like victimhood level. But I'm very grateful and blessed. Like Sky, my partner, he's like, I mean, he was more trusting, I think, of the birth experience than I was. He was like, I know you got, like, he was so there without being there. And I think both of us have done enough psychedelics to like know how to support someone through a trip as well. So it's kind of just like,
you're in a trip and supporting you.
Yeah, like on some level he knows that all he needs to do is really empower me, and sometimes all he needs to do is just like be holding, like he just held space. And then I think having the baby part in my arms though, like I had never held a newborn before until I was holding this squiggly warm wet one that came out of my own body while I'm fucking exhausted, squatting over a tub full of my own blood and shit. And I'm just like, oh my God, what the fuck do I do? And it was just this part of me that was just like, I like looked at him and I was just like, holy shit. Like, I'm just like, and I'm just holding the baby and like, I'm like, oh my God, like, this is so real. Like, this thing is so little. Like, I don't even know what I'm doing. And then later on, we were like, I think it had been a couple hours and we're like, we're shuffled to the bed now. And I'm lying there and Sky just was kind of like, I think it was the next morning or something. And Sky was sitting there. He's like, you know what's crazy is that like, this is legal. Like anyone can just make one of these fragile little beings and just like now be responsible for having them. Like, isn't that fucking nuts? And we were just both like mind blown that like,
Yeah.
all of a sudden we have this being that we're responsible for. And that's when I would have wanted the people. Like, that's when I wanted the elders, the grandmothers. Like throughout my whole postpartum journey, that has been the thing that I'm like, wow, I wish I had someone to do body work on me. I wish I had more friends who would come over and like cook a meal and like, you know, offer to do the dishes or be willing to just like when a baby's little, like they're napping sometimes like throughout the damn day, and I'd have like someone come visit and then Theo would start to get a little fussy and want to go for a nap and they're like, okay, I'll head out. And it's just like, or just go chill in the fucking room over there and read a book and I'll be down and like, you know, or like let me get him asleep in my like on the carrier and then I can kind of like, and it just felt like everyone was like hands up off wanting to like give me my space, and it was just kind of the same mirror of what I was facing, which was in that first moment of like, oh my God, I don't know how to care for a fucking newborn. No one knows how to care for a new mother. Like no one knows what we really need because like you said, we're not living in these collective villages anymore. So when I was young, I wasn't watching like a big breasted woman breastfeeding. Like all the breastfeeding information, it's for these women with like little boobs. I'm like, what position do I get the baby in when I have giant boobs like twice the size of their head? You know, no one's, whereas like I'm sure in the village I would have been like, oh, that, you know, busty bestie, like I've seen her feed her baby for years, like different babies for years now, like I know the different positions she uses. Like we don't have any of that though. Just, and I feel like then the people that are like, you know, the people like the elders of me and Sky's family that have come and tried to like offer support on some level didn't do it like this. You know, a lot of the like pediatrician recommendations of formula is better than breast milk, or like you don't need to breastfeed past 4 months, or you know, don't co-sleep, it's dangerous, have your baby in a crib and let them cry it out, it'll help them be more independent humans later on. Like all this shit, it's like those are the people coming to give you advice now in our culture. Very few people have done it and grown up and are embodying this perspective. And so when you were asking that hypothetical, I think earlier, just kind of like, well, how are we going to break the cycle? And like when we're still dealing with our own pain and through not living in victimhood and having fucking radical self-responsibility, in my opinion, because breaking the cycle in your own lineage is fucking lonely and it's intense and it's not probably going to be different than that. And I'm not doing this for right now. I'm doing this for 7 generations down the line. I'm doing this for my, you know, future daughters and the eggs that are being made in my body. I'm doing this for the mitochondria that will literally just be replicated out of my body for each one of my children. And like I get to create the new framework of epigenetic inheritance, and it's a huge undertaking. And I think living in the victim focuses so much on like not having the village, not having all these things. Like I have to talk myself out of it all the time, all the fucking time. Because if I don't show up well. I don't show up well to him. I get caught up in the moment of feeling sorry for myself or tired and overwhelmed. And that's a microcosm of the macrocosm of anyone, I think, trying to live a more connected life to like our Mother Earth.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's so easy to get caught up in the like victimhood stories of the things that have happened to us that have led us to where we are. And I'm not saying to spiritually bypass the healing, but because that's not how you heal. But I think on some level, how we heal is by like looking at it and choosing otherwise. And like having to make that move to like, fuck, I really don't want to stand up and hold that rebozo right now and squat into every fucking contraction. But I know that like I've got to like meet my pain.
Yeah, man.
And
You
that's,
can't get around it. The birth is like, no, really, you actually can't. It's not like you're gonna take a shot of whiskey when you're giving birth. And I don't know, maybe some people do, but probably shouldn't, like.
no, your baby's gonna come out drunk.
Get around the pain. You can't. You gotta get like through it.
I mean, or you get morphine, but plenty of women, or an epidural, and it literally numbs you from like, I think the neck down. Like,
and like how do you actually get it out, the baby out, then if you can't feel yourself? Like,
I mean, you know, forceps and suction and vacuum and coached pushing.
Fuck that.
Which, I mean, 60% of US births right now are induced, or like, you know, and if they're induced, it's a medicated birth. I mean, like, I read a statistic recently. It was like 1% of people in the US are currently lactating. And I'm like, only 1% of people are like currently breastfeeding. Like, and it's just, I mean, statistics are kind of bullshit, but it's just this like, I mean, even in this small town I live in, I mean, I don't really see very many like kids out, and I don't really see very many women breastfeeding in public either. I mean, we went out to eat last night, I think for the third time ever. And and there was like an old guy on the other corner of the room who was like mean mugging me for breastfeeding at the dinner table.
Really?
And it was just, yeah. I mean, it's just like, also though, I don't have like these like dainty little, like, my chest says sex on it. It's just like, I'm not one of those women who's like, their baby's head kind of hides what's going on. Like, I'm just voluptuous. So,
oh my god, that's so offensive. Like, I'm like, how can you possibly think? It's absurd to me. Like, so many social norms are absurd to me, but that one is like one that I just can't deal with. Like, I'm like, come on, dude. Like, you never seen a titty? Like,
yeah, but when you only associate titties as a sexual thing, then it's like, you know, come on, I'm at dinner with my wife and you're making me distracted. What the fuck is wrong with you? You know?
You're giving life to this new little child that you have. Oh, well, like, you're terrible for doing that. I'm just like, I don't get it. Like, I definitely would be one of those rebellious parents that are just like, nah, dude. Like, I think I was scared of birth for so long for a couple reasons. One, feeling like my autonomy could be taken away in a birthing situation where like we have a culture where we medicalize it, and there's a lot of domination, not domination over the, like, I would say women, but, you know, like a body that can birth or whatever that can happen in those spheres, and just like control. And that's why, you know, obviously the work of midwives and doulas is really important for advocating for folks who like do end up in hospitals and stuff. Just like totally terrified of losing autonomy in those moments with in relationship to other people who like have their ideas about how it should happen. You know, it's both like a doctor, but also, like you're saying, like people who have their ideas about what birth should look like, that might be your family or like nurses or people in relationship to that too.
And like well-meaning, it's not necessarily from a place of negative, like they don't see it as a negative fear-based place, they see it as loving and caring, you know. And that's the hard part, and that's why ultimately, like, I think that birth is just like any other psychedelic experience. Like, you get exactly what you need, you know. And I think like if what I had to contend with mentally and emotionally is like, what if I do end up having to go to the hospital? What if something happens that like actually warrants that, and I'm gonna have to go there, and I'm gonna like, you know, this guy's a very gentle man, like, is he really gonna be able to like advocate for me when every doctor is being pushy and telling him what needs to happen, and he's scared, and we've both never done this before? And like, I was really nervous about that, and I just kept having to remind myself that like the universe has always given me exactly what I need. Like, if that was the birthing experience I was going to have, it was because it was going to mirror something to me. It was going to have a lesson in there for me. And I think for every woman it's the same, you know. And I think for all children, like our little souls choose our parents. In my perspective, I think they know what the fuck they're getting into. I think that they know, like Theo knew he was going to come into this wackadoo family living in a cabin in Alaska who probably are going to be pretty isolated, and he's mostly going to hang out with chickens and sheep. And, you know, be more of a nature child, because we don't really have that many friends, and we don't really have that many people around us that are being very actively engaged in our life. We don't have any family in our area. And, you know, like there are moments where I feel like, oh my God, am I giving him like a really isolated existence? And then I'm just like, no, dude, his soul chose this. Like, stop building this to be something else. Like, I think a lot of us in our culture, especially in the Western kind of perspective, are very Christianized, even if I didn't grow up Christian, but like culture is, and God punishes in Christian cultures. And I think in the kind of deeper, more like the ley lines, the like through truth of living on earth, nothing is ever punishing you. It's just trying to push you in a more aligned direction. And sometimes that means having to like learn the hard way. And I think that like, as much as that sucks, that's where it's just another way of not getting caught up in the victim mentality of that experience and being like, well, I had to learn the hard way on this one. And it's because like the universe is actually really trying to get me to really see this and like really step into my power even deeper and in this more aligned way. And that was the dialogue that really got me through, I think, the fear of like losing my autonomy. And like on some level you have to consent to that.
Yeah.
Even in like, you know, like I was, even at the end of my labor, I had a really scary moment, and if I was in the hospital, it probably would have resulted in an emergency C-section, or at least like a vacuum or some sort of quick maneuver of them trying to get the baby out. And I got really scared and was able to still have my autonomous mind choose what I did instead, which was to trust. And that's when like literally like I was worried about it. I felt the cord. I had like cord prolapse kind of. I went to feel, and it was his head, but there was some of the cord poking out, and I could like wrap my 3 fingers around it. And which means that he was probably getting cut off on oxygen, because that's how the blood, it's so tight on your cervix, you know. And cord prolapse is one of those big ones in like the free birth world that like is really scary. Like that's, you know, go to the hospital probably. But it was like, I sat with it for like the split second that felt like eternity, and I was like, I don't need to go to the hospital. Like, and I was just like really tuned into him in that moment. And he was like, yeah, we're fine. I'm just going to come out right now. So in the ending of transition to pushing, he was out within 10 minutes.
Wow.
Whereas like in some labors that can take hours, that part, you know. And it was because he was like, he knew what the fuck he needed. He was like, I gotta get out. This is I'm in a bit of a jam.
It's time.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, for anyone who may be listening that is, you know, in that similar, I think I think it's makes sense to have that fear, but I think it's like fear is that thing that can sometimes be the edge we're meant to like step over, you know?
Yeah, I mean, fear is a huge, it's like it's its own person or something. It can change so much of how, yeah, like you were saying at the beginning of this conversation too, like the things that we tell ourselves at every moment that you sit with. Like I think the fear is like another person talking, and yeah, like what could go wrong or what could happen, or yeah, it not being what you want it to be or whatever. And but that fear can like what do you do, what do you do with it when you're standing there with it, you know? Like walk away from it, walk through it, walk up to it, touch it, you know? It's like, or let it consume you and like literally consume you. And so it's I mean that can go with so many aspects of our lives too, not just like in a situation like this, but obviously giving birth is such a big deal. You know, it's rightfully so that you'd be afraid of like hurting your child in this moment where you have a big decision to make or something like that, you know. And so many people, yeah, and so many people have ideas about how you should do it or how it should go. And I mean, and also in life, how you should be living life, what choices you should be making, like, and it's hard to not hear those things too and like be influenced by them, because like, yeah, I know for me, that's something that comes up for me too, like, oh, I'm here stranded in Utah getting my new transition. How did I get here? What the hell did I do wrong to get here? You know, the victim. It's a victim. I'm a victim of, well, I didn't choose the financial security, but I chose work that felt like important and like connecting to the land and these bigger ways, or like just this untraditional whatever, like something that isn't with the norm of what our culture says and all this stuff. But I'm like, oh, I just feel like a victim to the fucked up world we live in, right? Like, but we all are navigating and dancing with that in our own ways, and like it isn't, yeah, I mean, I'm recognizing that that's something that I felt in this too, you know. That's like an interesting what, because I don't want to be here in this RV park. I want to be doing something cool with plants, you know, with people I love. And I'm like, well, this is where I'm at, you
It's
know. Temporary. I know. I've been like, okay, well, so what? It's 10 days alone. Like after I already spent 3 weeks alone somewhere else. I'm like, well, then it's done. And then you'll think back when like, well, you got a lot done while you were there, you know. But yeah, it's temporary. Like everything is temporary, even the things that are happy, joyful, and the pain. Yeah, thinking about you with the universe taking you from behind. I'm gonna think,
Oh my god. That's the visual you can think of whenever you're like, this is temporary. Universe, just take me from behind and get through this.
Right, well, then it's like so much bigger than you, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
Hang me to the open wind, dear bones and broken skin. Open up and I'll let the whiskey pour down and out of me. Scratches on armor, rolling out of sigils in the sky. Tie it to a brick, throw it in the water to die. Throw it to the evening tide, let me dip aside, down out there at the wilderness. Got no way to go, rivers cannot bend, oceans rising, cities fall. Got nowhere to go, got nowhere to go. On lullabies, gave it all away. The only way to remedy. See you right, stay beside the garden tricks of the night. Pies fall, crazy bitches dead down. Love just the same, I know that look in your eyes. Does you see what does you see? Crow lanes at her feet, lava creeps and lava creeps. West and window of the times, falling stars and wishing wells, the sacrifice, magic lies, truth our children tread. Do we listen to what we're told? Sung and singing just as well. Sing the kind of the bills, line the sky and how they fell. Splintered up city and on ocean bottoms will all wash away. Broken glass lines of beaches for no one to see. Long after there was anyone, there's no one to take. There were no pains or lies, or a bunch of people dying. Lava creeps and lava creeps. Wolves are in the stars at night, dragons set ablaze the ties, and pies fall and pies fall.
When you were telling me about like how nice it would be to have people around like more after the fact, like I mean, sure we don't. It is real that like that's something we need to change. It's not just like mothers need to ask for it or we need. It's like no, it's not. It's like all of it around how we see mothers, especially young like new mothers. They're because they're not productive in capitalism, then they're not as valuable. Just like how older people are just put in nursing homes, or how children are seen certain ways too, and so they make it's just like it's all about what makes money, right? So I was like, I just thought of something that was really funny when you were talking about that. That was like this summer I was hanging out with some friends of mine, and we were going to do an apricot harvest together, and
visiting some of our friends who like walk with their goats, and they have a camel and like a bunch of animals, and they like live out and they walk all the time, and they harvest food and put it up. And we were by these feral apricot trees, and we went out to resupply them and hang out for a few days and make camp together. And two of the people that went were these young moms who both had children under 8 months, I think, and their partners stayed at home. And but then we had, you know, like a couple, it was me, it was them, it was like a handful of us, and they were like, you know what, we want our kids to like come camp with us, and I don't want to feel like I can't do this just because I'm like sitting around breastfeeding all day or whatever. And they both rode with me with their babies. And I was like, this is so fun. I'm like, my truck is like it's like diapers and snacks, and like they're figuring out their baby, like they have to legally, you know, they're supposed to be in a
The car
like,
seat.
what are they called? Car seats.
Yeah.
We're supposed to have both car seats a certain way, and like technically you're not supposed to be holding their baby, you know, all this stuff. I was like, I didn't know all that. Like, fuck. But one thing, something that happens on our way back was like one of the babies like pooped in their diaper, and we were like on this highway, we couldn't really pull off, and like, oh shit, like, and we were like, maybe we could wait a few more miles till we get to this health food store we're trying to stop at. But then my friend was like, I don't think we should wait because it's gonna get everywhere. Like, so we find a place to pull over, and it's sure enough, like, there's like poop literally on everything. Suddenly it's on my cooler, it's on the chair, it's on like all over things, like all down the legs, everything. And then we're like, all right, well, here we are. Like, and the other mom just pretty much was like, I got this. Because like that person's wet wipes and like stuff was like buried in the back of the truck, like it couldn't get to it. Like, how are we gonna deal with this? Like, another mom's like, I got this. And so she went and found her stuff. I held the other baby while she like wiped the butt of the her friend's baby. And like all of us suddenly were like, all right, we're doing this. We're cleaning the poop. We're on the side of the road. Like, you got this baby, I got this baby. Here we are. Like, I'm like, oh my god. We all were like laughing and laughing, and I'm like, at that moment, I thought about taking a picture because, you know, like I do a lot of photography, and I'm like, oh no, that would be rude. But later they were like, I wish you had. It would have been so funny. It's like those things, like, you know,
It's just like
bonding.
when it's so much easier to do chores when someone else is over your house.
Yeah.
It's like, you just sit there and talk to me. I'll do the dishes and deep clean my kitchen. I don't mind. You know, it's yeah. Honestly, I'm very thankful I've not had to deal with that really at all.
What? Yeah. Poop all over everything.
I think that, well, we do elimination communication, so I've never even had to change a poopy diaper.
Yeah.
But it means that he is so used to me like listening to his cues to go to the bathroom that like it's a 40 something minute drive into town. And so, but it takes me like an hour and a half because he's sitting in the car seat, and then he'll like signal to me like, Mom, I gotta go to the bathroom. And then I have to pull over, get out, we pee him on the side of the road, get back in the car, and then he'll do it again probably. And then at some point he'll be like, oh, but I don't just want to pee, I want to nurse for a while. And so then we got a nurse in the back of my truck because I'm still driving my pickup. So he's the car seat's like in the like back part of my pickup. And yeah, it's like the whole elimination communication thing is like added a whole different element to this whole mothering journey. But it's actually really cool to see how communicative babies are. Like, people just think of babies as not being able to communicate things, and like he will make it very clear he has to go to the bathroom, like, and it makes you be able to pick up on so many other like kind of, I mean, he doesn't speak English, but he talks about stuff and acknowledges things. And yeah, I'm grateful though. Haven't had any, I also just avoid the car a lot, but like haven't had any big poo car, because like, dude, it is hard. How the fuck do you change, like, especially if you're solo, it's like you don't have enough hands, like there's nowhere to put the baby, you know, like, but yeah,
we were all crammed in there too, and it was like there was a logistical like, how do we actually do this? Literally, it would have been really hard without two other people here to deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that's like the kind of part that the constant logistics and like how little I can sort of fly by the seat of my pants on things, because I'm constantly having to have the foresight of like, okay, so he woke up from his last nap around this time, and usually he only is asleep, like only awake between 2 and 3 hours. And so if I take this long to get to this place, like where would we probably be at in the day? Like yesterday we went into town as a family, and it was like fucking 15 degrees or something outside.
Wow.
And we're running errands, and it's like, oh, dude needs a nap and he's not going to sleep in the car. And it's like we kind of pushed through the grocery shopping a little bit, and then it was like, all right, we really got to nap him. And there's this like one little trail kind of close to town, and he's just such a nature boy, like he's just so used to falling asleep in the carrier. So we end up like having to do like a nap walk, and it's like 15 degrees, so you're just like bundled on bundled, like this little babushka baby, like cuddled up. And it's, you know, just constant having to think about that stuff. But it's kind of fun. I'm like having fun with the whole like baby gear stuff and knitting him a bunch of things. And but hold on real quick, I'm gonna jump onto my computer because my phone's gonna die.
Okay. We'll see if I have to press record again, but I will.
Does it say I'm in there?
Oh, yeah. Huh. Funny. So both of you. Oh, there we go. Still recording. All good. That was funny.
Is it good? Can you hear me?
Yeah, definitely. So you were like, what do I do? How do I do this? And now you're figuring it out, you know, like one knitting one thing at a time. No, I mean, one poop at a time, figuring it out.
At a time. Yeah. I mean, you know, I think that's kind of like, I think I'm been a more of a person who has a relationship to like control and like learning things and figuring it out and feeling like, you know, I'm like about the 3 P's, like proper prior planning, you know. I like feeling like I know what I'm getting into. I like having the right gear for the right task. I like feeling like I'm the Johnny on the spot person, you know. And I think that it's really hard to properly prepare for something that you just like have no experience with.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the surrendering I've been going through, and the trusting with my relationship to the universe and the web of weird and how it's all being woven, that like just ultimately it boils down to like, as long as I am really feeling like my intentions are like soul level intentions, they're not just like only heart, only emotion, they're not just like only in my head, but they're like where those two places meet. Like in Sanskrit, that's the hridaya. And it's like if I can feel that like balance point in the way I'm moving through my life, I feel like I'm doing okay. But when I get too caught up in my head and the way I'm making choices is like really in my head, or if I'm like really just living by my emotional realm, that's when I feel like life feels off kilter.
God, sometimes I feel like I'm too much in my head about it, and then sometimes too much in my emotion, and I'm like, yeah, well, how do you distinguish what those things are from like what your soul is actually telling you, which sometimes can be filtered through those places too. But like when you're dealing with the big times in your life, big decisions or big conflicts or big things that need to be worked out, and there's so much intellectualizing, so much saying the same problem over and over, and trying to figure out what it means over and over, and then the same feelings over and over. Like, how do you tap into that? I mean, I don't even know if I'm asking you to answer this as much as I'm asking myself or anybody who might be thinking this way. Like, how do you distinguish? Because, you know,
I want to answer this, but I'm gonna
answer it.
I think from my experience so far, it's tracking my patterns. Like, it's trusting that like well, if I've made the choice that I'm making, I just got to go 100% into the choice that I'm making. Because if I make this choice and I've just got one foot in that experience,
Yeah.
I'm not going to really ever fully know what it would have been like. So I got to be able to make a two-footed decision into an experience. But then also, if the same energies keep coming up over and over and over again, if I keep having the same patterning, if I keep having the same types of relationships, I keep attracting the same type of problems with the same, like with friendships, I keep dealing with the same thing work-wise, I keep dealing with the same thing, it's like that to me is when there's a cog in the wheel. And that's when it's like, okay, you know, what is this? And I feel like most of the time for me, I think shadow has been harder. Shadow's harder to see. Inner child is on some level, I think, easier to get in touch with.
Mm-hmm.
But it's learning how to bring those people to the table in yourself and be like, what do you need? What do you need from me? Like for me, stopping being nomadic meant stop running, stop searching outside myself. We've talked about this, but like that finding home within yourself type feeling. For me, I knew when I like brought that part of me to the table and was like, what's the blockage here for you? It was just like, dude, I don't even know what safe fucking feels like. And so I was like, well, then why don't you just force yourself to stay somewhere for a while that ticks a lot of the boxes for you, and just like start like letting that person come over to eat a lot and getting them to start feeling safe. And so like when me and Sky got together, that really was like the coinciding of me, you know, staying in one place enough to invite the same inner child part of me to the table all the time. And it was not like the most fun thing. I'm very grateful he's still around. But like I had a lot to work through. I feel like I really had a lot of walls and boundaries, and you know, in some forms of therapy they call them protectors, but it's like the parts of you that learned how to become the shield in yourself to prevent you from having to feel the like probably ongoing trauma that was going on when you didn't really have autonomy as a child. And as adults, we get to choose now like what love looks like for us and how we want to love ourselves. Like those things aren't static. And it just means that we have to be willing to like do the work of like giving ourselves that thing that we felt like was missing in the past. And for me, that being stability, one of the hardest things for me to do is stay put. Like, and I'm just recently very excited about maybe moving again, but I'm also kind of like, well, I'm also going through a lot, and that's kind of my thing as I start to like fantasize about like, oh, but this bioregion is really speaking to me right now, and like I want to work with these different plants, and you know, I'd love to fish this certain type of fish, and like whatever the fuck it is, you know. And I have this vision, and a lot of those, that's like, oh, that's like your form of escapism too. Like that's how I end up, you know, trying to not have to be in what I'm experiencing necessarily. Yeah. And I think ultimately how you know if you're making the quote unquote soulful decision is do it and see if you find your soul there. Because ultimately that's all life is like we're here. Like I don't think anyone, I mean maybe there's bodhisattvas, but like whatever, no one's coming into the world with their soul being like, yeah, I don't really need to be mirrored or grow in this experience of life, so I'm just here to enjoy. Most people are here to learn stuff, to experience things. And I think like, you know, that's not always going to be the fun, comfortable, easy road. But I think the more I've leaned into the things that are not fun and comfortable and easy, the more I find my soul there anyway. So I think my saving grace, my priority has always been like really feeling held by land, which is why like right now I could be living in town and I'd be able to hang out with people a lot more, have a lot more community around. People would probably stop by and bring me food more often if I wasn't like 40-minute drive one way out the road. But then I wouldn't be in the peace and serenity and like sanctuary and be able to like live this quality of life that I live. And like I am choosing this more harder postpartum path in a way, but I'm not going to compromise on the sanctuary, nature connection, quality of life bit. That's more important to me ultimately. And so I have to be willing to suck it up. And
Yeah.
And I think we all have, there's no have your cake and eat it too situations in life that mean that like, well, if I make this life choice, miraculously I won't have to do that anymore. And it's hard to like be in the headspace that makes you feel strong enough, capable enough to like live there. I find that I go in and out of the second guessing myself throughout the day, and then I have to give myself that pep talk of like, all right, dude, like this is what you're doing. You chose this. If you want to choose something else, okay, but you got to have 2 feet there. And like, I know you don't have 2 feet in wanting to live in town.
To have your cake and eat it too is, yeah, that's a what, half, one foot's in one world, one foot's in the other, or you like, you want all the things at once. I feel like I've done that, and I've had myself be a part of other people's decisions to do that, and it's hard. It doesn't feel good to be doing that, or to have other people doing that with you involved. Yeah
It just doesn't work. And then it's like I look back at different times in my life too where I tried to do that, and I'm just like, wow, I didn't really get to enjoy either one of those things that I was trying to make happen at the same time. Like, why didn't I just let my life be more chapters in that moment and be like, okay, this chapter is going to be this. And then, you know, when I'm done with that part, I'll move on to the next chapter where I'll do that other thing now, you know? But I think part of the deeper attachment wound is this feeling of like doom and gloom where like, I don't necessarily always believe that there's more future for me. I think that's like one of the underlying fears is that like, I've got to do it all right now because I don't know how much longer I have or how much longer we have. And I think that also is really mimicked in like how we approach land and nature through like climate talks and these like very apocalyptic things. And it's just like, dude, the only thing that's going to die right now is capitalism, you know, is the structures that have been built by it. But like, you know, how we choose to live now is how we're equipping ourselves to continue moving forward. And if you end up on a more land-based way of life, everything takes time. Like we've lived here for 3 years and we're still fucking building the soil to put raised beds up. You know, like I things don't happen quickly when you work with land. It makes you pay your dues.
Well, things don't happen quickly in relational healing or self and healing with the self either. I'm starting to realize like
no,
your whole life you spend working on yourself, but also things that happen with someone or people in your life, like things, there's no quick fix, you know. It's like, you can't have the most amazing garden in 1 year the way that you would have it if it was 20 years, you know. So I think, and then 1 year you might have total crop failure. You might want to give up and think this is not possible. I don't know how to garden. I can't do this. Fuck this. I'm not going to do this again. Why? But then you take all that, those plants that died, compost them a year later, then they'll be able to be a part of the garden too, or whatever.
And then you'll also be learning like, so that woodpecker migrated earlier that year, and I'm gonna do some pattern recognition as to like, when I see that woodpecker migrate early or whatever, these certain owls come back around. That tends to be a quick winter come up in the early fall. So I'm gonna have the pattern recognition of, you know, that I'm gonna make sure that I stay tuned in to the world around me and present enough
that I can be really acknowledging those subtlety cues and patterns. And that's the same thing we have to do internally when working through wounds and trauma. Is you're kind of like, I think on some level we all hope to find this like one mantra that will just like all of a sudden eradicate the need to have to like hold space for that part of ourselves anymore. But that's just not how even like any of life works. Like it always asks us to stay mindful and stay present to patterns and to what's showing up around us and in us. And I think last time we talked, I was like starting the journey of maybe going to school, and I wrote a paper. Yeah, I did. I like beasted out a lot of courses, and my focus was psychology, anthropology, and archaeology, and like health and their intersections. And then when I didn't finish, I got like, I'm halfway through sophomore year, and then I was pregnant, and I was like, oh, stopping this for now. But one of the papers that I wrote, the last paper that I wrote was a paper on traditional ecological knowledge and how in a lot of cultures of the world, they don't necessarily recognize climate change the way we recognize climate change. They're just recognizing the change. Like, in the Himalayas, they don't say, oh my God, like winter's wrong because it's happening this way now. They say, well, the way we look at winter coming is when these different birds come into the area, and they just come at a different time now. And that flower that signifies spring, well, that just also comes at a different time now too. And it's like the narrative upon which life is being told and written isn't from this dire predictions, horrifying place. It's from life has changed. It's been this way a long time. And maybe it's different than any of us can remember or our grandparents can remember. But why do we immediately jump to everything has to go to shit? And I think now that becoming a mother, I'm just so fucking like, it's so obvious to me. I'm like, dude, this is all the mother wound. So many of us aren't deeply nurtured in young life anymore. And so it's so much easier to project that out onto everything else. That like, oh, at some point the land is not going to hold us anymore. And it's like, no, like, it's not like all of a sudden everything is just going to disappear. It just means that like we'll have to adapt. And so my paper was kind of just about how pastoralist peoples are some of the best adaptable peoples in regards to like learning from indigenous cultures during climate change, because they're constantly moving, but at the same time still deeply in relationship to place, and their movements aren't as disjointed as like our more maybe modern nomadic styles. It's very much like hubs and central locations, and this ability to still have that, I will see this bush every spring. What am I thinking now that I wasn't thinking then? Rather than kind of like my nomadicism, which was much more disjointed and all over the place and go here, go there, go there. It was like there's still the rhythmic structure enough to be able to still have pattern recognition. And I think for me, the big merging of learning from indigenous ecological traditional wisdom is we need to keep ourselves in enough relationship that we have that pattern recognition. It doesn't just work for when to plant certain crops, when to harvest certain things, how to keep our like plant allies in abundance and healthy and tended in these spaces, but it's also the exact same inner work we need to be doing. Of if I can be in pattern recognition with myself, if I can be this present and this mindful, then I'm not going to fall into these like old patterns and loops and like traumatic ways of being, and like literally just continuing the same loop for myself from that, part of me that I abandoned or was pushed away a long time ago.
Yeah, saying a lot of things that I need to hear right now, and I'm sure a lot of people listening probably need to hear too, because like,
Ditto.
like, it's funny, the pattern recognition thing is such a big thing for me. Like, and when I was farming and living in a community where there was also a lot of attention being paid to like the wild things happening, like, oh, it's time to pick blackberries, or oh, it's time to go get the Saskatoon berries, or oh, like rose hips are ripening. Oh, this is the window of time to get honeysuckle and rose, like this. And for me, when I did stay put there and I was farming, so I had to be intuitively tuned into like, oh, the chickweed's bigger now. Oh, these things in this particular kind of way, everything around me gave me that information, and I don't like forget. It's weird. It's and it's not that I just did that there. I mean, I do that everywhere I go, but it looks different, and there is something missing for me though that does feel uneasy not being somewhere where I get to see that every year, and you become friends with those plants. You become friends with the energy and entities of that place that like communicate those patterns, where the birds and the sky and the clouds and the mountains, they all become like people, right, to you, and the bond is formed by just simply observing. And even if you didn't even realize you observed it when it happened, it's there, it's stored somewhere. And when I was back in North Carolina well, not this summer, but the summer before, at a piece of land that I used to farm on, I was there for a little bit. It was such a trip to be somewhere and have all the patterns that I didn't even realize I remembered come to me. Like, and I just would walk and be like, I remember there was this thing here at this time in this moment, and it's still here, but it's in a different way. Or like, I remember like this little patch of stinging nettle being here, and now it's 3 times as big. Holy shit. I remember, like there's so many little things that I didn't even realize I remembered that I remembered. It's like crazy that people were like, how do you remember this? Like, and some people who have just been there too for years didn't even really, maybe they pay attention to other things potentially, right? But like,
Well, you're trained. You've trained
yeah.
yourself. It's the same thing. That's the same thing we like. Some people I think are better at that on an inner level, and some people are better at that on the like outer level. And then I think some people just haven't really grown that muscle,
Yeah. Of course, in the inner level for me, I can recognize I have certain things. Like, I feel like fall has been a really cool time for me in the past, where I'm like, oh, it's such a nice energy. And I really haven't had a really easeful fall and winter for a long time, because it's that time where you go inward. It's a time where you're like, if you're kind of nomadic, it's a really weird, scary time, because you're like, where am I going to be safe? Where am I going to be having all my needs met? Not isolated. Yeah. And I'm like, I get anxious in the fall, even the late summer when fall's about to hit. I get anxious about where am I going to be? What am I going to be doing? And when I did have, like a couple years ago when I was in Colorado, there was a feeling of, nah, I'm not going anywhere. And I had a really amazing fall, but then we had to leave, and then suddenly it's middle winter and we had to like uproot. That was really like not great, because I was like, finally I'm having a good fall. I'm like, and this time of really experiencing what a lot of people get to experience, where you go internal slowly, finish bringing in your harvest, start making your fires, start crafting a little bit more. You're still out doing stuff, but then more and more you're inward, inside, internal, and then to let that complete itself through an entire hibernation period, and then have it slowly reverse itself to opening. Like, I haven't had that in a place in a really long time, where I don't move or change or alter something, or like, it's insane, like in a long time. Like, I don't even remember the last time right now. And I'm like, wow, well, I know I need that and want that, and that's what my whatever is asking for, my child or my like adult self.
And like the earth that is your body. I mean, like, what's your heritage? Like the peoples that have built your bones, the land that built the like heritage structure of your body. Like, how did those peoples experience the rhythm of nature, because all of mine had winter, and I feel that. Like, even when I was nomadic, I'd prioritize, like, okay, what am I doing for winter? Where am I going to be? How am I going to spend it? Like, because I think it's so hard to not give yourself that cyclical experience, you know?
Yeah. And when I kept saying that, and then here I am in this place where I'm not going to be spending the winter here because I mean, like in an RV park in a weird town in Utah, like, no, with no one I know around, like, no. But I'm like, wow, it's so interesting how I've disrupted that for myself at times because of making money, or because of being scared of something, or because of feeling like, oh, antsiness or some reason, or because I was forced to leave and I had to change it even though I thought I was choosing that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like that there isn't, it's like, of course there's an uneasiness in my body around that, because if you're not settled and you have all your firewood chopped, you have everything you need for that time ready to go as you enter into it, then yeah, you're gonna not feel great about it. And it's like, yeah, our bodies are actually, like, the genetics that make up our bodies are like epigenetics, like, call that in, right? And want that. And so, and then if you are paying attention, like trained, like, I definitely am missing the connections that I felt at moments where I was more like, here I am in this place. Like, even in Colorado when I was there, it was the first time in a while I had been like in that place of being able to, in my nervous system, also take in the pattern recognition, like in a way, deep way of like, this place is my home, or these are my friends, like, now, because I know I'm going to see this place again, or at least I thought at that time, like, versus traveling. And I do go back to some of the same places, but I don't get to see those places in their dance through the year,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I was just up in a place in Nevada I've been to like 10 times or something, but I've only seen it in the fall and then a couple times in the spring. But like, how do you make friends ultimately? I mean, my work, that's what I'm having an existential crisis about with my work a lot too, is that I've done this thing where I've wanted to grasp some broader pattern work, and that has been detrimental to me as a human vessel, as a part of that project, because it's pulled me away from like, what would it look like to then hold that in a particular place and not leave anymore.
Yeah.
I could still hold all of that, and that will be a really cool thing. What's that?
You could still do what you're doing, but from one place, and just, you know,
Yeah.
we're zooming for this.
Yeah, right? Like, and the pandemic was a gift in that way in some ways too, because it forced me to like stay closer in somewhere. Like, it just eliminated all those choices, like, oh, finally. But it also was detrimental because I felt socially isolated, and it affected like parts of my life that I'm still dealing with, you know. Like, it felt socially isolating in a way that didn't realize at the time it wasn't like feeling like I was suffering every day or anything necessarily, but more that I actually feel that more now around that, you know. But it's like all the choices got eliminated for me, so then it made it easier, and I was ready for it. And so now I'm kind of like not necessarily in that place, and I'm kind of back into this place that I was before that, but I'm also seeing it in a different way, because I'm like, yeah, you literally can't do this in the same way that you've been doing it. Like, you will wither away. Like, because what's
you
the
need
point
more
of,
earth.
yeah, like integrating all of that, all the patterns into
You
an
have too much
orientation.
air in yourself to be so mobile, I think.
For sure. Like, yeah, I mean
that's not, but it's like, that's why people who have a lot of air are more drawn to doing that mobile, quick change life anyway, because it feels, on some level, it feels so fucking natural. Do you know what I mean? But then at the same time, it feels like I'm doing something that does not feel natural.
I have this funny thing where I gotta go, and then I'm like, I feel relief temporarily. Okay, I'm something's happening.
but then I'm like, oh no, like I'm sleeping in the Walmart parking lot that night or something, and I'm like, why am I doing this to myself again?
And
It's
this
funny.
is where that pattern recognition comes in.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
this is where that observer energy of like, okay, I have this like inkling of doing this thing, or I have this itch, and if I scratch it, am I just like gonna spread this itch everywhere else because it's actually just poison ivy? Or am I meant to just kind of sit with the itch and that's the medicine? And that is the part that I had to be radically honest with myself. And this is like the whole thing of like, I think that was I stopped the domino of, okay, cool. You have so many ways of intellectualizing why the way you're doing things the way you're doing is how they need to be being done, but it's actually not actually deeply aligned with your soul. And that's when it's like, whether it's, you know, emotional reasons or ego, that's when, you know, for me, I kind of see it in this like triad spectrum of, is it, you know, ego, emotions, or my soul? And I think that like, it's just like with anything, any lie, there's always an element of truth to it that makes it more believable. That's why it becomes more believable. And I think like things that come purely from emotion and purely from ego aren't ever truly that, because on some level there is some sort of underlying truth and soul in that. You can't strip these things of each other. They're a whole they're holistic thing, but they can rule you. They can be the driver of your car. And I don't want my ego driving my car. I mean, when I have let my ego drive my car, that's when life bitch slaps you in the face and is like, are you going to learn this lesson over again, over again, over again, over again? And for me, I'm just kind of a pragmatist in the sense like, I don't like having to do the same thing a million times over. I like working smarter, not harder. And so it becomes, I had to switch my ego around on itself and be like, ego, we're going to be smarter than that. And we're not going to fucking do the same shit and learn this lesson over and over and over again. And we're going to try to circumvent that. And then through that circumvention, it's a whole nother like, okay, now am I on the other pendulum swing? Am I living from like way too much of my emotional place now because I've been trying to circumvent my ego place? And this is the dance of like the way that weird works in our life. We have some element of choice, but it's also like, in my opinion, there's things that are just kind of woven that we're meant to experience. And like, we choose how we experience them. We choose how we react to them. But like, we were dealt these cards that were our childhoods, were our upbringings, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, are we still going to let that shit rule us now and the effects of that rule us now? Or do we like kind of create the mythopoetic structure within our lives to not let it rule us anymore and give us some catharsis and outlet and be that nurturer we need? Like right now for me, that inner dialogue is like, I have to be the mother that I see, that I didn't, the aspects of my mother that I didn't feel. I have to mother myself that way. And that also means I have to feel that grief. And then that also means that I have to continue to choose to show up, because if I just live in the heart of it, the grief of it, I don't show up to my life anymore. And it messes up everything. It muddles up everything because I'm not really there. And then if I'm just living from the ego place of it, I think I've got it down and handled, when really I'm just living in reaction to it. And no one wants to be reactionary. It's just reaction. You're probably just going to perpetuate the same wounds that you already are still holding. And then, so ultimately, I'm trying to find that middle path sweet spot of allowing myself to mother my child, live the way that I want to be ultimately living in this world, and on the same token, allow myself to feel the grief of what I mourn for not having. And the only way that I am right now finding to hold all that at the same place is when I don't have victimhood at all. And so I'm having to weed it out from everything. It's like amazing how ingrained, and I thought I didn't really have much of it. It's kind of hilarious, actually, how much I'm finding. um, because, we end up self-sabotaging. And it's like, oh, you've been saying this for years that you want to live this more cyclical thing. And it's like, well, then how the fuck do you keep end up not having a winter somewhere? It's because you self-sabotage it, You get caught up in the like whims or like emotional feelings or whatever, rather than going, okay, higher self, I need this right now. And there's going to be probably a lot of other voices that come up that try to self-sabotage me away from getting to that thing, because like growth feels pretty shitty at first. And so it's going to probably feel shitty. But that's because I'm like, what happens when you're growing? Well, stuff starts feeling small. It starts feeling shitty. So you got to grow. And it's just, you're getting a new size. And
it's funny how like it's looked different every year, to be honest. Some years it's been the same pattern kind of, but then there's been a few years where I try really hard and then something happens. Of course I can say it's somebody else's fault or something else happened. Like we had,
but maybe that's what you're meant to learn from in that experience, in my opinion. Like,
we're doing this, we're having a good fall, and into the winter everything was like so great about it in so many ways. There were a few things where like, oh, and then I don't want to say too much about my personal life in this particular instance. I was with someone and we were in our bell tent. We had our home like going, and then we got kicked out. We had everything was good. We got kicked out, and it wasn't my fault. It was kind of the other person's fault, but also.
But you chose.
The reality was something would have happened no matter what, because the place where we were staying was the people were ultimately not great people. The land was amazing. I was like enchanted by the land. The land was, and really connected with that piece of land. But the people who own that land ultimately were going to find some reason to sabotage our illusion of we're going to have a great winter or something.
Well, and that's also self-sabotage, because it's like, on some level, I knew they weren't really good people. Yeah, I was allowing myself to think this was going to be a stable, safe thing anyway.
Choosing it anyways, yeah.
And that's where
there's more to all of that whole thing, which I won't get into. This is really not what not the specifics of something like this. It was just like an interesting thing of where I was like feeling into myself a certain kind of groundedness I haven't felt in a while. It was like celebrating it so hard and really reveling in it and how good it felt and the healing, like having my parasympathetic nervous system be like the dominant force in my everyday life instead of the sympathetic, and walking every day and seeing like, oh, the cottonwoods changing in subtle ways every day, and seeing the birch change, and just like, oh, it's just like I'm being able to actually like be friends with these beings. And I still miss that piece of land so much, because I befriended it in such a way that I hadn't been able to ground into in a while. But yeah, it was so funny, like, oh, well, even when I really thought I was actually doing something different, it's still, and it's like, well, you can say it sucks that people have to be mean to you, or like you feel like it was unfair or whatever. Things happen that do feel outside of your control. That's something I'm grappling with a lot right now. A lot of circumstances of certain things that have happened with me, like in my life, individually and in relationship with other people. Like this, it's like easy to be like, it's just the circumstances, and in some ways shit just happens, and in other ways I'm just like, wow, like it is something to think about. Like, how do you actually, you can't predict at the same time. Like, you can try your best to create a scenario where you think everything's going to work differently, and try to choose things that are going to create something that works differently, right? And the circumstances aren't going to not be the dominating force to like upend you. But you really don't ever know, like,
that's the thing about like when you try to make decisions from intellectual place or emotional place, like in a deep, and you maybe don't have time to quite get into the soul, or you like aren't sure like how to trust what the soul place is saying, right? Like, and yeah, it's like at what place do you have to be open to the fact that things are just going to happen, circumstances are going to happen, no matter how much intention you put in for it to be different this time, you know, and just know that that's going to come, and like again, you can control how you react to it, and
that's
a lot of the
and that's the weird, you know.
Yeah,
that's the wind of fate that blows through. That's like, yeah, I know you thought you had this whole carefully laid out plan, but I'm gonna blow through, kind of switch things around, because you really need to step into this part of yourself right now. Or, you know, I know this feels like rejection, but it's actually protection. And I think that like building that trust with the universe has been my biggest like intention probably in the last, you know, 5, maybe more, maybe like 7 years of just like, I need to be building that trust muscle, because this is what the attachment wounds disrupt, is that ability to just like see the universe as something we can trust. I mean, in a lot of like, you know, in the neuroscience world, they say that that muscle really is hardwired at a certain point. And I hesitate, I'm not going to use hardwired, I'm going to say soft wired, because there is work you can do to switch it around. It's just hard wiring, you know, you got to like to rewire something is a bitch. But from 0 to 9 months of infancy is when that part of your brain, the HPA axis, is really develops its like its common receptors. And so if you grow up in those 0 to 9 months not really feeling like your needs are getting met, feeling like a lack of nurturance in your life, feeling like maybe unseen and misunderstood, overstimulated a lot, all these different things that like babies don't have the same type of fight, flight, fawn reaction. They just shut down. So they just seem like they're a baby. You know, our ability to live in a more stressful state is wired before we're 9 months, before we're even a year old. Because that part of your brain is so malleable. But then by the time you turn a year old, I think it's or like 3 years old, 90% of your freaking brain in this like the receptors that are created for parasympathetic and chemicals and sympathetic chemicals are already put in. And it's just like, you know, what we're up against now as adults is wiring, is programming. And it's like on some level, you do have to then be even more observant, even more connected to that pattern recognition, which is why I think nature can be so healing, like really getting into farming and gardening and tending and foraging and having these relationships with things, because it's exercising the same muscle that helps us in ourselves, as long as we flip the light around and put it in. And yeah, I'm like so in that right now, because I've been so focused on making sure that Theo has that, you know, that like if I don't see myself here, like I like my little spot, you know, but like I don't see myself here for like the next 10 years, you know. And that scares me a little bit. But in the same, and there's this part of me that's like, well, if I don't see myself here for forever, then let's get the fuck out of here right now, you know, because that's how I've been. But now I'm dwelling in that place more of like, I don't really see myself here forever, but I can do this for right now. And there's ways that I can make this work for me right now. And there's ways that I can tap in and connect. There's ways that I can feel held and that I can feel in relationship. And also thinking of Theo, like, I want him to have that groundedness, that stability. And like his soul chose us while we were here. I believe that's for a reason. I believe his little Aquarian self wants the extra fucking solidity of this, like, me and Sky really present in this time of our lives with him in this, like, small ass little cabin together, you know? I think on some level, it's like we, even by thinking we can plan what's perfect for us, is egoic. And I think that that's the first step for me in navigating what my decisions are coming from, is like, do I think that I know better? And
Yeah.
usually no, I don't. And I have to somehow surrender, but with that grit grace approach of not surrendering to my emotional victimhood experience, but not pushing myself so hard with my ego that I'm just fucking gonna Billy Badass myself through unhealthy situations. It's like, what's that sweet spot?
Yeah. I feel like I got on here with you just for, it's like almost like a therapy session or something. I mean, we're in conversation, but I'm like, yep. Like,
I think that's my job. I think that's my soul's role here. Is I just, like, that's why I'm going to school for what I'm going to. I'd like to be able to have an actual on the books therapy practice at some point in my life.
Yeah, the way you pull together like some of these other things that you've studied a lot too in your life, and it all kind of make it. Yeah, I've been going to therapy more this year, and so like becoming more familiar with what does it mean to talk about inner child work or parts of yourself that have this or that. Like, I haven't been familiar with that language so much in the past. Like, I haven't been doing anything like that in my life at all until recently, and I'm like, wow, this is such a different way to be thinking about all this, and like, it's new for me in some ways, and other ways I've been hearing it, but like new for me the way I'm starting to see it, and it's not easy.
I'm gonna recommend a book.
Okay.
It's called Feeding Your Demons.
Feeding what?
Feeding Your Demons. And that's a good one for like my analogy of bringing the demons to the table and figuring out what they need. And then another one for like kind of the journey of eradicating victimhood. I hear a little child is She by Robert A. Johnson.
Okay.
Come here, my darling baby. Did you fall?
No, you need
Oh, come here. Oh, my love. Oh, hi. Why do you not have sockums? Oh, you do have sockums on.
Like co-regulation win. Safety love. Hi. I was figuring we probably would get off here soon anyway, so it was fun. Like, hi, such a happy little baby now all of a sudden.
Yeah, this is called secure attachment.
Hi.
Hi, Duba Duba. You doing okay?
He's, you know, this whole learning to walk thing is quite the fucking tumble bumble nation.
Yeah, hurts sometimes to learn new things, huh?
Yes.
Well, thanks for joining me on this, and any last words before we go?
No, I guess I got a lot of beautiful messages and DMs and stuff from the last interview talk we had.
Yeah.
And some of the like topics that people brought up, I've been really trying to like, you know, figure out how to share more about in my work, and like I really, like last time we talked, I was really like, I want to start doing more online workshops and things like that, and I really think that's like sort of what I want, but more so it's like I want to just have like talks. Like I want to do stuff like this and like pick a theme and kind of have people be able to come and like feel that sense of like probably what on some level both of us feel right now, that sense of like connection, having a deeper conversation, witnessing people in their experience, and like continual development of authenticity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm kind of working on it, but I've also, full-time momming. So if you are listening and you want to be in on whenever I get my shit together enough, / have some creative clarity on these things, I have like a mailing list sign up in my Instagram thing. And I really don't send much out pretty much ever, unless I really have something to say. So that would be a good way to stay in touch.
Cool. As you get more than 5 hours of sleep, as that
Honestly,
progresses.
no, it's more so just like, I think like Sky has his own business, and so he's like, he does like building projects and all sorts of things, and he's finally like kind of in the slowdown of the season. So I'm gonna have a lot more of like this. I was able to just sit here with you for however long that was, because Sky could hang out with him. I can't have like conversations like this very easily for like that much mindful attention when I've got this little dooba. Unless he's like this and breastfeeding, and then it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming and hanging out on here with me, and also just was glad to talk to you. Hi. In general, and I'll be excited to share this because I was like, I just think it'd be fun to do a, hey, what's Sarah up to now that she's got a kid, and what's, so many people were like excited about that conversation. Well,
it was a pleasure.
Yeah, it'll be nice to talk again soon sometime, and happy moving into that slow winter cold. Sounds like it's already getting cold there, but cold, dark time there. It's just such a dramatic shift in Alaska.
Oh, well, it's like it's we're waking up and the sun's not coming up for like, we're up for like sometimes 5 hours before the sun is up.
No
biting. Oh, no biting. You're ready for my full attention. Okay.
All right, thank you. Talk to you sometime later.
Okay.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Hey y'all, you just listened to an episode of the Ground Shots podcast hosted by me, Kelly Moody, with the guest Sarah Galvin of House of Yore. The music for this episode was Mother Marrow's Sweat and Splinters, the theme music as usual, and New Futures by Prey. You can see both of their Bandcamps on the show notes for this episode. Don't forget to donate to charity of Mother Marrow's GoFundMe, linked in the show notes, and I also have one going too for my transmission. Really hope y'all enjoyed this episode of the podcast with Sarah Galvin. Until next time, y'all.